Hello, everyone, and welcome into CrushTheStreet.com. I got a very interesting guest. I think you guys are going to appreciate the insight we get today from Mr. Chris Duane. He was a 30-year-old millionaire working at his family's East Coast car dealership when he walked away from it all to become a citizen journalist. And he sold his house in 2005, great timing, right before the real estate crash. And he began warning people for what was to come, and who's going to listen. And sure enough, we watched things unfold since then. His YouTube channel, the greatest truth never told.com, both amazing places for research and information. Chris, thanks for coming on Crush the Street with me.
Hey, thank you for letting me on. It's always good to get into new forums and talk about difference of where things are, so people can do what my motto was: listen to all and follow none. You got to see differing opinions and hopefully arrive at the best solution for yourself.
Well, I think we're going to agree on a lot of things. We got the situation here with the longest bull market in history now. It was all over mainstream media. The U.S. equity markets were going on the longest recorded one. I guess there's some asterisks depending on what time period you look at. But for the most part, equities have been on fire. And what do you make of this? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, when I stepped away from my family business in 2008, I thought it was going to be the end of the world. I mean, I didn't see how this debt bubble was going to continue to be reflated, and history has given me more perspective to realize that 2008 was an institutional crisis, one in which there was a bunch of bad banks, and AIG and Freddie Mac and General Motors and a lot of other big institutions in the economy made a lot of bad bets into bad markets, and they ended up being worthless. Those institutions got bailed out by the larger power out there, the world governments and the world's privately owned central banks, who took on all those bad debts and paid them off at par to keep the economy going, the overall Ponzi scheme that's going on. And none of the bad actors, none of the bad debts, none of the bad practices went away. Nobody went to jail. There was no systemic reform, not that Trump has gotten rid of a couple of the little reforms that did happen. And now all those problems that we saw in 2008 have been festered into a much larger global generational bubble, where we're no longer worried about AIG, Citibank, or any of these major institutions going bad, but now we're hearing emerging market countries going bad. And now the problems went from an institutional, corporate level up to now a global currency crisis, one in which I think there is no higher authority that's going to come in and reset or resave the system, much in the same way that we saw in 2008. And the only policy that they had to reset and rebuild the system then was to create, trillions upon trillions of new dollars to flood the system and lower interest rates to zero. Now the debts of the global governments are now double, sometimes quadruple what it was in the 2008 financial crisis. I'm referencing China that quadrupled their debt, but overall the global debt's doubled since then, and it's been done in the face of artificially low 0% ZIRP, NERP interest rates that have been held for far too long. And even Trump warned, when he was running for president, if interest rates rise just a little bit, it's going to end very badly. And that's exactly what has been happening. The Federal Reserve, privately owned central bank, has been raising interest rates into this, and they will continue to do it until something breaks. If you're looking for one thing to look for to trigger the next recession without any uncertainty, the Federal Reserve raising interest rates correlates with exactly what happens with every recession. As soon as they raise the interest rates, they keep raising it until the payments pop whatever asset bubble is. And now, unlike 2008, where there was a housing bubble and the tech bubble before that, there is now a bubble in everything. Every asset class is in a bubble except for silver, and that's why I'm in silver now.
So, Chris, maybe to expand on the implications of this, and I'll ask you this: is there a certain amount of good that you see happening to offset any of the the water that has filled up this ship, that's ultimately sinking it. Anything that's happening, with Trump policies or optimism. I mean, anything. Is there any sort of good that you see happening that can offset what we have all been predicting to happen here in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's good though, but America has profited off of this dollar hegemon world reserve currency status for multiple generations since World War II, and our quality of life is very high. But I don't think it's benefiting people the way it did back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, where the common man's standard of living is actually rising. What we're actually doing is we're taking on more debt and more risk to maintain the fact that we don't really produce much wealth anymore. I mean, we're like a 70% consumer economy, which relies upon people to take out debt for money that they don't have, to buy things that they don't need, to impress people who don't care. And I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. Yeah, everybody's got iPads and $1,000 phones in their pocket, but does that really make the country wealthier? Or do we have this big illusion of wealth that's going around there, and that we don't really produce wealth much in the same way we maybe in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where it was built off of oil or cattle or some commodity thing, or that we were the manufacturer for the whole world. That has shifted over to many other nations that like China and a lot of these other places where they have the manufacturing capability and the markets, and maybe not quite as bad of a dire financial situation. So yes and no. The stock market's up, but is that really benefiting everybody? No. I mean, I think that benefits the very few people who stolen stocks. Well, the majority of the United States, they can't even get $500 together for an emergency.
Wow.
This isn't a system that is benefiting the common man, and one in which I don't even think that after the next financial crisis, the guys that own and control the system are really going to, repop it up the way that they did back after, World War II. They have AI and robotics. They don't need our manufacturing, our labor. I mean, trucking is the number one job overall, and they're saying within 5 to 10 years you could see, Uber or some kind of robotic trucking make humans no longer have to do that anymore. Then what does humanity do? So I don't know. I mean, I look at the world the way it is right now, and I just don't want to continue to invest in bubbles, and I'd rather be, into something secure and safe in my possession.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will run this by you. Have the politics have been different? I think there would have been more cheerleading going on through the mainstream news outlets, CNBC, and some of these financial news outlets. But I'd say there's actually a fair amount of skepticism about the economy, especially considering Trump is taking ownership over the stock market, going to all-time highs, and the jobs, and all these things that he's promoting off the headline numbers here. But you have Warren Buffett really being picky with the stocks that he's buying. He had a big interview today, this morning. Jamie Dimon is saying, "Hey, we're in the 6th inning of this bull market here." There seems to be some sort of hesitation or skepticism, even in the conventional news media. And I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on that?
That reminds me of all the same stuff that they were saying before 2008. I'm sure if you looked at a lot of the commentators and Buffett and all these guys in the summer of 2008 prior to the financial collapse, they were like, I think the most famous one was, the Citibank president that said, so long as the music's playing, we're going to keep dancing, and that's the way it is. The music's still playing on Wall Street. There is a nice interest rate environment that benefits corporations to take on more debt, to do more stock buybacks, to pump up their stock price. That's really been the fuel of it. It hasn't been the average worker investing in the stock market, and much in the same way the baby boomers may have done in the 80s and 90s. We're a highly leveraged financial system. I mean, Trump at Dow 18,000 was saying that Janet Yellen and the very political Fed was benefiting Obama by keeping interest rates artificially low, and that if interest rates rise even just a little bit, this big, fat, ugly bubble was going to pop. And that was Dow 18,000. Now what is it, 26,000? And Dow, and Trump's like, yeah, this is mine and it's real. Like, what changed? Nothing changed. It's just that he's in power now, and I think that's going to be his ultimate trouble, is that he took credit for this. It's now his economy, and when it blows up, it'll be on him.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I actually am appreciative of at least some of the things that have gotten done during the Trump presidency here, especially, reforming the taxes and, the regulations, and it's attracting money into the country. But I agree with you. There's a lot of bad that's been done and is almost irreparable in so many ways. So, how long this will go on for, who knows? And if it does crash on his watch, it's going to be very difficult, especially prior to 2020, for him to get reelected again. So that'll be really interesting going forward, and a lot of entertainment for the next year and a half or so as we go into the next election here. But so Chris, let's talk about silver then. Remind people, because I think a lot of people are very frustrated with precious metals, given what we've seen. We've had these quick spikes with precious metals only for it to just trickle back down. So every time people get optimistic, they see it go up. Most people miss it. They didn't buy, at the bottom there. They're buying when it gets to 1350, and then for it to just come back down again. And the market just has a way of washing and rinsing investors, especially in the way that we've seen precious metals trade. But, what are your thoughts on it? Are you optimistic? Obviously, I know you are, but, just gonna give us your feelings in this market right now.
Yeah, I value silver not on the dollar basis, and I think that's the freedom and what keeps me sleeping well at night. I used to measure my wealth in dollars and digits on the screen. I used to have the six-figure brokerage accounts and think that I was so smart for having so much digital wealth, until I woke up to the realization that our money is debt and debt is money, and those that create debt are the ones that profit off of this. And my family, being in the business that we were in, we created debt on millions of dollars every month, and we were taking a small cut of it. And the realization that somebody comes in to buy a $40,000 car, they don't have $40,000 of cash or gold or silver to trade for the hunk of metal that is known as a car. They go in and they sign a lease, a retail agreement saying that they're going to pay back $40,000 plus interest over the next 5 years or whatever. And that is when money is created. And I was like, wow, that's an amazing thing, because, when you come to the realization that debt is money, money is debt, when debt is created, money is created, and when debt is paid off, money is destroyed, that totally warps your world. Now it's no longer a game of getting digits in the account. You start to realize that all that, even the digits that you rack up, is somebody else's debt. No dollar comes into the economy without somebody taking on a debt and paying interest back on it. So once you realize the fundamental nature of our debt-based fiat Ponzi scheme, then you start to realize, well, shoot, I don't want to be a part of this when this ends. And when it ends, it's going to end horribly. And we see that in a lot of these emerging markets now. Venezuela, Argentina's having problems. Turkey, they're all going to have, and it's going to spill over into the developed markets at some point. Like, you don't have, if the United States economy was, at risk when Citibank and AIG and all these other ones are going down, what's going to happen when sovereign nations no longer pay back their debts? And now it's a game of, who can, mess with each other first. That's where I think the problem is going to happen. And once you understand the whole debt-based monetary system, and that it's a global system now, and generational, that you want to take your wealth out of it, the future promise of wealth that digits represent, and put it into real tangible things, which, measures wealth. So when I see the price of silver go down, it doesn't make me happy, but I measure my wealth in ounces, not the dollars. I don't go, oh, I have, six figures, or, how many figures of silver that I have. I measure it in how many ounces that I have. And I think once silver investors get out of this, I want silver to go up in price, dollar price, and actually just start saying, hey, I'm going to measure my wealth like a king, and how many ounces do I have in my possession, then it becomes a lot easier thing. And then you actually start looking for, the price of silver to go down, because I dollar cost average on a weekly basis, and, send in roughly amount of same amount of dollars, and I've been getting more and more silver back. I hated stacking silver at 30. That was when I was sending in roughly the same amount of money, getting half the amount of silver back. And I mean, that's how I invest. I'm a weird duck, I admit, because most silver stackers are just looking at, oh, my dollar values is going down and down and down, and it sucks.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely two sides to the coin, and I appreciate that insight, and it's a good reminder for people who are a little frustrated with precious metals now. And I'll ask you about this because I know a lot of people are starting to talk about it now, and that's the clean energy uses of silver, specifically with solar panels. Is this even on your radar, or something you even care about in terms of why you invest in silver, or what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so there's three demands for silver and the reasons why I invest in silver. Number one is this global Ponzi wealth out there. I mean, there's literally quadrillions of dollars of digital illusions of wealth floating out there. And silver and gold represent a tiny fraction of hard assets in that portfolio. I think right now the percentage of gold and silver in the global portfolio of people is less than the fraction of 1%. Where at one point, like during the 80s and during the 20s and 30s, during like the Great Depression, gold and silver would have made up almost 50% of the global portfolio of wealth out there, and we're just totally like in this la-la land. So right now, and over the past, I would say, 40, 50 years, silver has only been driven by the industrial demand of silver. So the silver that is being used and consumed is being used in such small quantities, and in all the, think about how much our world has changed in the last 10 years, the amount of computers and cell phones and, all the electronic stuff out there. Then throw in the medical uses, like silver is an antimicrobial thing. They're going to be using it in cancer, treatments. They're used in my washing machine. They have silver ions that, break up the bacteria particles and all this other stuff. So the industrial uses of silver are growing. They're using it in yoga pants now to prevent, smelly pants and, all this other stuff. So the industrial uses of silver are growing. In fact, it's the second largest, most versatile commodity in the world next to oil. And we all know how important oil is. And its unique properties cannot be replaced by any other, metal in most cases. Like if you're going to make a mirror, you're going to make the highest conductive, lasers or whatever, science, telescopes, space, NASA, military, industrial, you're going to use the highest quality things. And silver is the best electrical conductor, a reflective metal. And it's being used in such small quantities that it's literally being mined out of existence. Like in 1950, there was an estimated 10 billion ounces of silver above ground. Now there's an estimated 1 to 2 billion ounces of silver. That we've depleted the silver stocks that humanity has been, mined throughout all of history. And conversely, gold in 1950 said that there was only estimated about 1 billion ounces of gold above ground. And during the 1950s till now, there's an estimated 6 billion ounces of gold. So there's physically more ounces of gold above ground than there is silver. Silver has more industrial uses than gold. Silver is, absolutely vital to our way of life, and yet the market is treating it as if it's garbage, like it's aluminum. Like the gold to silver ratio is like 1 to 82. It takes 82 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold, when the above ground ratio is 6 ounces of gold to 1 ounce of silver. The mining ratio is 1 ounce of gold to 9 ounces of silver. It's completely out of whack. So for the industrial uses, for the ratio uses, I love buying silver. But there's two more demands that are totally destroyed right now that I think are going to be the real rocket fuel for silver going forward. Number one is investment demand. I already mentioned before that silver and gold make up less than a fraction of 1% of all the global portfolio out there. And that has a lot to do with the price suppression of it. The markets chase hot money. Whenever there's a bubble in anything, that's where all the money flows. You look at the FANG stocks. It's not all the stock market that's going up. It's a few bubble ones that are like hot, and that's what the money's chasing after. But as soon as silver catches, the investor eye again, it will go very fast up, and we'll see a huge influx of investment demand because it doesn't take a lot of money. The entire, there's only 1 billion ounces or even 2 billion ounces of silver above ground. The entire market cap of all the silver in the world is roughly anywhere between 16 and 32 billion dollars. Like, I mean, you can sneeze that in all these markets. And then finally, the most fundamental and most historic use of demand of silver is the monetary demand. It's completely decimated. Like nowhere on earth is silver being used as money. And yet that was the overall most valuable demand of silver. And because we now have all these digital illusions of wealth out there, people have been attuned to using, digits, as a form of accountant. And there's no role for silver anymore. Well, if we end up having the kind of financial crisis that I think we're going to have, a global generational debt-based fiat Ponzi crisis, one in which all asset classes start getting destroyed and people start clamoring for real wealth. They're worried about their banks going bad. They're worried about their own currency being worthless, like in Venezuela and Argentina. There's going to be a clamoring for and need for silver as money. And then the biggest contention that most people go, well, people aren't going to go back to the Old West and start carrying around bags of silver. No, I don't think so. I think that's where blockchain technology would actually be a benefit to monetize and help distribute silver as money, as a free digital receipt, much in the same way that we used to have silver certificates instead of carrying around coins. And that's what the dollars used to be. They used to be, good for payable to the bearer for 1 ounce of silver. It used to be just a paper receipt. Like the money was not anything of value. It was a receipt for the real stuff that was in the bank. And we've gotten away from that. So I think one of the possibilities for blockchain is to use it as a free digital receipt for the real asset of silver underneath it. And I don't know how or where that's going to happen. And I certainly wouldn't be interested in it now because to me, that's just a lot of counterparty risk that I don't need. My only goal is to take my real tangible wealth through whatever this financial paradigm is into whatever the next financial paradigm. After we get there, sure, let's blockchain it. Let's borrow against it. Let's make silver banks. Let's, spend it, trade it for real assets, and tax-free, asset swaps or whatever. The key is to get your wealth through the next financial crisis, and that's where I think silver really shines above everything else.
Absolutely. So, Chris, we've actually had a great diversity of opinions here at Crush the Street, and I welcome it. I know you're not a huge fan of actual Bitcoin. Now, you've talked about the possibility for blockchain and the implementation of that, but you've been outspoken about your opinions on blockchains and all of the different cryptocurrencies that are out there. And, I would remind people in December of this year, of last year, I should say, we were talking about, hey, it's getting crazy out there with the price of Bitcoin and, what can we expect? How quickly can we see this turn around? And sure enough, we're in a bear market that's getting brutal. It's washing out a lot of money here. But, from your perspective, it's welcomed here. Your opinion is welcomed. What are your thoughts on the cycle of what we're seeing, and how bad can this get, and where do you see this headed?
I mean, if we're talking about cryptos, I'm probably the first one to be against cryptos, and I still hold this opinion that they're going to HODL to zero. I don't think that there's any intrinsic value in any of these cryptos. Does that mean blockchain technology is worthless? No, I think the problem, and this is where I don't think people get why I keep saying this. When you apply a value to an essentially worthless, string of code, that's when the Ponzi starts because it's intrinsically worthless. It's no different. The blockchain tokens and protocols are no different than email. It's a protocol of transferring information. It doesn't give email a value of 20,000 Bitcoin or whatever, dollars that each, that they do. And I do see uses for it, but I think that the costs of using blockchain will be much in the same way that the cost of email. Email is not free. You have servers, you have, infrastructure and stuff, but companies have found ways of using it to monetize it, but they essentially make email for free. I mean, I don't know how many email accounts you can get. But they use that as a way of transferring information around, and it's certainly a value. And I like the value of blockchain, but the idea that the digital receipt is worth $20,000 is insane to me. But I can see, blockchain tokens and the cost of maintaining whatever the blockchain protocol is or whatever being held by, a bullion depository and saying, hey, the Texas Bullion Depository or whatever it is, they have a blockchain technology. They're going to pay for the tokens and the generation of it or whatever, and they use those as digital receipts for the real assets there. that's where I think that's where the synthesis of thesis and antithesis, the synthesis is going to be. So I think, and I keep saying this, and then we'll see what ends up happening. That you cannot prescribe values to these digital illusions of wealth that are going to maintain for the long period. Crypto has lasted during the tail end of this incredible bull market in all asset classes, and it certainly came in at a time and captured people's imagination. And guess what? It ballooned up, and now it's dying off. And I think the bubble was right when you were calling it, December, in January of this past year, and I don't think it's ever going to go back. I don't think we're going to see a second bull run of cryptos, because I think far too many people got hurt. I mean, $650 billion worth of nominal value has been wiped out of the crypto market. And people took loans against that and bet everything on it. So I don't see that. And even if it was, the crypto market's still 10, 20 times the size of silver. I'd rather be in undervalued, unloved, unwanted physical silver in my possession than a market cap of something that's 20 times the size of it, and I don't even think it will be worth anything.
Yeah. Well, I think there's truth in what you're saying. I don't fully agree that there's no value in cryptocurrency, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. Mm-hmm. But I think it's prudent, and it puts into perspective how cheap silver is at the moment, and the cycles of markets. And I think because of such a bull market we've seen in cryptocurrencies, the bear market could get very brutal, whether you think it's going to zero or you think it's just going to bottom out at 3,000. I think this bear market could be brutal.
See, the problem with Bitcoin is if it does get down to 3,000, and I'm not a technological dude, but I do know that it's a lot of energy that goes into transferring Bitcoin and the whole mining process, and that at some point, if there's not a monetary reward, there's no more money coming into it, who's going to keep this? I mean, it's using up so much energy just to maintain it, and then that it's been paid for by all the new people coming in and throwing money at it and rewarding the people that are doing it. But at some point, if the price of Bitcoin drops below the cost of mining Bitcoin in China, which is probably the cheapest, and that's where the majority of this is still going on, if the cost of Bitcoin goes below that, who's going to keep the servers on? And then what's the market value of it? How do you even transact it if all these nodes start going dark, because no one's going to throw more energy and money into something that's no longer benefiting them? What happens?
Yeah, well, there's actually adjustments that happen in the network, and when they don't have the incentive, people go offline, just like you're mm-hmm. saying. But that does mm-hmm. create the right market. That's one of the beautiful things about what I love about cryptocurrency, and specifically Bitcoin, is that there is a market that is found for that, and there are incentives for people to come online and support the network, because it's always updating itself.
But and again, I've looked into it, but if the exponential energy use of these cryptos keeps getting larger, because in order to process all these new blockchains and stuff, it gets larger. It's like the energy used 7 years ago when I started talking about this was minuscule. They could create Bitcoins out of thin air and it didn't cost much. They could probably do it on a laptop. Now they need these huge farms with coal firing plants and all that other stuff. At some point, I think I saw an article by February 2020, they were predicting that this exponential growth of Bitcoin, of energy consumption, was going to take up the entire world. And you're saying, yeah, they can adjust it back, but it's still a growing energy suck to do what? The thing I love about silver is that it's cheap energy that we have now stored forever in the form of money, whereas crypto is cheap, energy that's being consumed to create it, but needs consistently more energy just to keep the system going. And God forbid if we enter into an energy crisis, much in the same way that we saw during the last financial crisis, where oil becomes worth more, and the cost of transacting all these cryptos, it's like a future energy suck versus silver's past cheap energy contained into the form of it. So I think that's another major thing that I just I can't just turn a blind eye to that. The energy consumption of these cryptos, at some point, I don't think that the market's going to continue to support something that is sucking so much energy and wealth when you don't have these bubbles anymore.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely something that I think will impact the market. We'll definitely have to see how it plays out. I can tell you that there's a lot of technology and some of the smartest minds in the world are contributing to the network. And one of the big things that are coming out is the Lightning Network, which is going to really be able to scale the amount of transactions that can happen every second. And that's things getting more efficient in the Bitcoin network, because as you're alluding to, it takes a lot of computing power, and they're working on that. And that's what one of the things that I believe adds value to the network is that there's people contributing brain power to this. And you can boil it down to what's its true fundamental use case, and silver has that physical attribute, but there's a lot of things that are getting poured into the Bitcoin network, which is intangible. The network has a value. The fact that people are, supporting it, there's optimism. I mean, you look what optimism and psychology does for the U.S. economy. And, we can all say that this is going to end ultimately.
In the market now, I look at the Google searches for Bitcoin. I mean, they're like, I don't even think people are interested in it the way that they were even 8 months ago.
Oh, yeah. Well, I agree with you on that.
Where are you at?
No, I agree with you on that. I think it's going down back to a fundamental growth phase. A lot of the speculative money is leaving the sector, and now it's coming back down to the developers. I mean, I was just speaking to someone in the Bitcoin community this morning, and I mean, you just hear about this Lightning Network that's going to be added to the space, and then that's going to enable merchants to begin to start using it. And I see this as a fundamental growth in Bitcoin that will start to make it more and more usable and address some of the problems. And I think that's what's beautiful about Bitcoin, is that it's fluid. And I definitely am not 100% in the category that believes that it can't be displaced by something else, because you're right, it's not something that is unique and finite in this universe in terms of something else coming along and knocking it aside. But I think there's a lot of value in the fact that there's a first mover advantage. There's a lot of work that's been put into it, and I don't know. I don't think it's something that's going away in the next 100 or even 200 years, and there's going to be a lot of development in it. I mean, I have the same sort of faith in it as I would, a Berkshire Hathaway or IBM computer type of thing. I don't necessarily think they're going to be around for.
Chain is going to go away, and there might be something better that comes out. I just don't think Bitcoin is going to exist, or a lot of these other cryptos. Like, my overall thesis is that the governments are going to create, like we've seen with Venezuela creating their own crypto. They're going to create their own crypto Ponzi scheme. There's something that is legal in their country. I just don't think that these guys are going to, that own and control the world, are going to allow competition. I mean, John D. Rockefeller, Rothschild say, competition is a sin. So I think the technology and the work and all that other stuff, those guys that built that system are probably going to end up working for JP Morgan or the United States government or whoever else, the Bank of International Settlements, to bring about whatever crypto is going to come after we have dollar collapse.
Yeah, well, and that's very possible. So it's definitely something to keep our minds perked to, and the possibilities out there are endless for what we can see here, especially over the next 5 to 10 to 15 years. I think change is inevitable, especially as technology continues to evolve faster than Moore's Law. And what we're learning today in the college education system, this legacy dinosaur system that is out there, is so unfortunate and so expensive. And we're just learning things that are 10 and 20 years too late.
Isn't that ironic? We have a $1.5 trillion student loan problem, and we have the internet. Like, literally anything you need to learn is probably on the internet for free, and yet we've saddled our youngest generation with unbankruptable debt at the earliest age so that they can't even have enough money to go out and start a family and buy a house. And in the age of the internet, it really boggles my mind.
It's the worst dichotomy that there is. In the most freely available information age of our time, we have the most expensive education system happening. So it's definitely one of the biggest bubbles we see happening and exploding over the next little while here. So, Chris, I want to first of all thank you for coming on the line with me today and exploring these topics with us and helping us expand our mind on what is possible and what's down the line. If people want to learn more about what you're doing, please let them know where they can go and what they can expect to find.
Yeah, I mean, I cover all these topics on Truth Never Told. It's my YouTube channel. We have like 150,000 subscribers. And then every week I release a new mini mintage silver. So I've aligned my passion with my career, and I've designed coins because I don't like government silver. I think they're boring and don't offer any numismatic value in the long term because they make millions of them. So every week I come out with a new design. Comes with a certificate of authenticity, sells for as little as $2 over spot. And they have 6-year collector base that's continuing to grow. And I think the unique thing that I do with Silver Shield is to create opposite consciousness stuff. I mean, my whole series is based around this debt and death paradigm, and that silver is the cure for it.
Well, Chris, thanks for coming on Crush the Street. I appreciate your time with us here today.
Thank you so much. I look forward to talking to you again.